There are some ghosts in my house, not the spooky kind, thankfully, but the lingering specters of past projects, ideas that soared high in my imagination only to crash and burn in a spectacular, often expensive heap of sawdust and regret. Today, we are finally facing one of the biggest, baddest, most humiliating of those ghosts. We are talking about the living room built-in media console. Oh, that thing. It stands there now, a physical manifestation of every corner I cut, every measurement I eyeballed, and every time I thought watching a 5-minute YouTube video made me an expert carpenter. It is a monument to my past hubris, and honestly, it has been an eyesore, a source of quiet shame, for far too long. Let me take you back a few years. My living room, a fairly decent size, felt a little undefined. There was a big, blank wall, just begging for something substantial, something that would anchor the television, provide some much-needed storage for books and media, and generally elevate the aesthetic from generic box to thoughtfully curated space. I saw countless images online, sleek, minimalist designs, often featuring floating shelves and integrated lighting, all seemingly crafted by artisans with years of experience and access to specialized tools. My brain, however, interpreted these sophisticated creations as merely bigger, fancier boxes. How hard could it be? I had assembled IKEA furniture, I had hung pictures, I had even built a wobbly bookshelf in college. This was just a logical progression, surely. My journey into the heart of DIY delusion began, as many such journeys do, with a boundless, almost reckless optimism. I envisioned a grand media console spanning the entire wall, a seamless integration of form and function. It would have a perfectly sized niche for the television, flanked by tall, elegant cabinets with glass doors, and perhaps a row of deep drawers beneath for all the unsightly cables and gaming consoles. The finish would be a crisp, modern white, reflecting light and making the room feel larger. It would be a showpiece, a testament to my burgeoning carpentry skills, a conversation starter that subtly whispered, "Yes, I built this, and yes, it is magnificent." The planning phase, in retrospect, was less a phase and more a fleeting thought. I scribbled some rough dimensions on the back of an envelope, measured the wall with a tape measure I later discovered was slightly bent, and then promptly lost the envelope. My primary design tool was a mental image, an ever-shifting mirage of perfection that somehow always compensated for the glaring lack of actual structural engineering. I decided on MDF for the material. Everyone on YouTube used MDF. It was cheap, supposedly easy to cut, and took paint well. What could go wrong? The Internet, in its infinite wisdom, had convinced me that MDF was the amateur carpenter's best friend. It lied. It lied profoundly and extensively. Armed with my bent tape measure, a circular saw that had seen better days, and a brand new Craig jig, a tool I bought purely because it looked professional and promised perfectly flush joints with minimal effort, I embarked on what I now refer to as the Great MDF Massacre. The first cuts were exhilarating. The smell of fresh sawdust, the whine of the saw, the satisfying thud of a newly separated panel. Then came the reality. MDF, while easy to cut in theory, produces a fine, insidious dust that coats everything, clings to your clothes, and makes you cough like a Victorian chimney sweep. And it's heavy, incredibly, disproportionately heavy. My initial enthusiasm began to wane as I wrestled massive sheets of the stuff, trying to make perfectly square cuts on a makeshift workbench made of sawhorses and an old door. Corners were not square, edges were not straight, but my optimism, a stubborn beast, persisted. I told myself, it'll be fine. Caulk and paint make a carpenter what he ain't. This became my mantra. The assembly process was a masterclass in compromise. The Craig jig, my supposed savior, worked wonders on paper, but in practice my lack of precision meant that even with perfectly angled screws, the panels didn't quite meet flush. Gaps appeared, small at first, then larger, like tiny, unwelcome smiles on the face of my burgeoning monstrosity. I used more screws, then wood glue, then more screws. I shimmed. I clamped. I swore under my breath. The main carcass, intended to be a robust, rectilinear foundation, began to take on a subtle, organic lean, a gentle curve that suggested a sentient being slowly sagging under the weight of its own inadequacies. Then came the shelves. Oh, the shelves! I cut them to size, installed them, and within a week, under the modest weight of a few paperbacks, they began to bow. MDF, it turns out, has all the structural integrity of a wet noodle when spanning any significant distance. My sleek, minimalist vision instantly transformed into a utilitarian nightmare, requiring me to add unsightly support braces every foot or so, further cluttering the design and making the interior look less like a custom built-in and more like a hastily constructed scaffolding. The television niche was another triumph of hope over experience. I measured the TV precisely, or so I thought. When it came time to slide the precious flat screen into its new home, it was a hair too tight, a very stubborn, unyielding hair. Rather than carefully trim the opening, which would have involved more sawdust and more cursing, I opted for a more direct approach, brute force. A series of shoves and wiggles eventually wedged the TV into place, but not without a chorus of creaks from the MDF, and a few fresh gouges along the edges of the opening. It fit, technically, but it looked less like a custom fit and more like a hostage situation. The ultimate betrayal, however, came with the doors and drawers. My initial grand plan included a relationship with time. In my former life, time was a relentless current, a force to be managed, optimized, and filled to the brim. Now, it became a landscape to be explored, a series of moments to be savored rather than merely consumed. I began to practice the art of the deliberate pause, inserting small, unhurried intervals into the fabric of my day. My mornings, once a frantic dash, transformed into a quiet ritual of unhurried reflection, the slow brewing of coffee, the mindful observation of the awakening world outside my window. Each task, no matter how mundane, was approached not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as an opportunity for presence. Washing dishes became a meditation on the warmth of the water, the feel of the ceramic, the simple satisfaction of cleanliness. Walking became an exploration of the pavement beneath my feet, the changing light, the subtle scents carried on the breeze. These moments, once rushed past, now formed the quiet anchors of my day, grounding me in the present. The concept of unscheduling emerged as a counterpoint to the prevailing culture of overcommitment. I began to carve out pockets of time that were deliberately left empty, not for specific activities but for whatever might organically arise. These were not voids to be filled, but spaces for introspection, for spontaneous creativity, for simply being. I learned to resist the urge to immediately reach for a device or a task when faced with an unscheduled moment. Instead, I allowed silence to settle, to observe the subtle workings of my own mind, to let thoughts drift and coalesce without pressure. This practice, initially unsettling in its unfamiliar quietude, gradually became a source of profound replenishment. It was in these unscheduled spaces that genuine insights often surfaced, that a deeper sense of peace took root, and that the quiet hum of my own being could be heard above the world's clamor. The resistance to urgency became a core tenet, a gentle but firm refusal to be swept away by the prevailing current of hurry. Patience, once a virtue I aspired to, became a lived experience, woven into the very texture of my days. This recalibration of my temporal landscape did not diminish my productivity. Rather, it deepened it, allowing for a more focused and creative engagement with my work and passions. The curation extended inevitably to my mental landscape, particularly to the information I consumed. Just as I had cleared physical clutter, I began to filter the incessant stream of data that vied for my attention. The news, social media, unsolicited opinions, and endless digital distractions all were subjected to the same discerning eye I had applied to my possessions. Was this information truly enriching? Did it serve a purpose? Did it align with my values? Or was it merely noise, contributing to a sense of overwhelm and agitation? I cultivated a practice of mindful consumption, choosing sources thoughtfully, limiting exposure, and creating boundaries around my digital life. My phone, once a constant companion, now spent significant periods out of reach, allowing my mind to wander freely, unburdened by notifications and the siren call of endless scrolling. This mental hygiene was not about ignorance, but about protection, safeguarding the clarity I had worked so hard to cultivate. It was about creating space for genuine thought, for deep reflection, for the cultivation of a quiet inner garden where ideas could bloom undisturbed. Cultivating curiosity and learning remained important, but with a renewed intention. I sought out knowledge that resonated deeply, that expanded my understanding of the world or myself, rather than simply accumulating facts for their own sake. Books were chosen with care, read slowly, and absorbed fully. Conversations were sought for their depth and authenticity, rather than their superficiality. The role of silence and solitude in fostering clarity became paramount. I discovered that true understanding often emerged not from constant input, but from the quiet processing of experience, from allowing the mind to settle and organize itself. This deliberate filtering of external stimuli allowed for a richer internal dialogue, a clearer understanding of my own thoughts and emotions, uncolored by external projections. It was a continuous practice of discerning the signal from the noise, both in the world and within my own mind. This heightened awareness naturally led to a more profound sensory engagement with the world around me. My senses, once dulled by distraction and haste, awakened to the subtleties of existence. The texture of a worn wooden table beneath my fingertips, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the intricate pattern of light shifting across a wall as the sun traversed the sky. These details, once overlooked, now held a quiet magic. The world felt richer, more vibrant, simply because I was more present within it. A simple meal became an exploration of flavors and textures, a mindful appreciation of sustenance. The sound of rain on the roof was no longer mere background noise, but a soothing symphony, each drop a tiny percussion. The warmth of sunlight on my skin became a conscious blessing. This practice of finding the extraordinary in the ordinary transformed my daily life into a continuous stream of small wonders, a tapestry woven with threads of conscious appreciation. My body, too, became a vessel for this heightened presence. Mindful movement, whether in a gentle stretch or a deliberate walk, connected me more deeply to its subtle messages. Breath awareness, a simple yet powerful anchor, allowed me to return to the present moment whenever my mind began to drift. This integration of mind and body fostered a deeper sense of wholeness and groundedness. My connection to nature deepened significantly. Walks in the local park, observing the changing seasons, the resilient growth of trees, the intricate dance of insects, these became essential rituals. Nature, in its effortless cycles and profound simplicity, offered a mirror to the intentionality I sought to cultivate within myself, providing solace, perspective, and a quiet sense of belonging. It was a reminder that true beauty often lies in unadorned authenticity, a lesson I continuously absorbed and sought to embody. Navigating the external world with this newly calibrated internal compass required a gentle but firm resolve. The world outside my carefully constructed sanctuary still operated on principles of speed, acquisition, and external validation. Maintaining my inner peace amidst this often chaotic backdrop became an ongoing practice of boundary setting. This involved the gentle art of saying no, not out of refusal or judgment, but out of a clear understanding of my own capacity and priorities. Saying yes, too, became a more intentional act, ensuring that my commitments aligned with my values and genuinely contributed to my well-being or the well-being of others. It was a continuous dance between engagement and retreat, a calibration of my inner compass against the magnetic pull of external demands. I learned to protect my energy, to recognize when I needed solitude, and to honor those needs without guilt. This was not about isolation, but about discerning where my presence was most meaningful, and where my energy could be most authentically offered. Interactions with others inevitably shifted. Being more present and clear within myself meant I could offer a more genuine presence to those around me. Conversations became deeper, listening became more active, less clouded by my own internal chatter or the need to formulate a response. There was less room for superficiality, more for genuine connection, for truly seeing and hearing another person. I found myself drawn to relationships that mirrored this intentionality, valuing depth and authenticity over casual acquaintance. I learned to communicate my needs and boundaries with kindness, and to offer empathy without absorbing the emotional turmoil of others. This quiet strength, derived from internal alignment, allowed me to engage with the world from a place of peace, rather than reactivity. I discovered that embodying this way of being, rather than preaching it, often had a more profound and gentle influence on those around me. My relationship with material possessions, having been the genesis of this entire journey, continued to evolve. It was no longer about deprivation or strict minimalism, but about a profound appreciation for what I chose to keep and what I chose to bring into my life. Each object in my home now told a story, served a true purpose, or brought a genuine, resonant joy. The process of acquiring new things became a deliberate act, a conscious search for resonance rather than novelty or fleeting desire. I considered the ethics of consumption, the story behind an object, its craftsmanship, and its longevity. The joy shifted from the act of acquiring to the act of maintaining, of caring for what I owned, of repairing rather than replacing. There was a deep satisfaction in tending to my possessions, in knowing their history and their place in my curated life. The distinction between need and desire became clearer, and conscious choice informed both, ensuring that every addition was a thoughtful one, contributing to the harmony of my space and my being. It was crucial to acknowledge that this was not a static state of enlightenment, but a continuous unfolding, a daily practice. There were days when old habits resurfaced, when the allure of distraction was strong, when the world felt overwhelming and threatened to pull me back into its hurried current. These moments were not met with self-judgment or frustration, but with a gentle redirection, a quiet return to the core principles. Each challenge became an opportunity for reevaluation, for deepening the practice, for refining the tools of self-awareness. It was a continuous tuning of an instrument, aiming for a clearer, more resonant note. Like a gardener tending to a beloved plot, I learned to prune away the weeds of distraction, to nourish the seeds of intention, and to patiently await the bloom of presence. The resilience I built was not from avoiding difficulties, but from consistently and gently returning to my chosen path, understanding that imperfection was part of the human experience and that grace lay in the continuous effort. The curated self was not a finished product. It was an ongoing conversation with my inner landscape, a living, breathing entity in constant evolution. The profound sense of liberation I felt was not the absence of effort, but the deep satisfaction found in the effort itself, the quiet joy of living a life aligned with my truest values. It was a quiet strength, a resilient peace, built not on avoidance of the world's complexities, but on a deliberate, loving engagement with existence itself. This journey, rather than leading to a fixed destination, continued to unfold with each conscious breath, each considered choice, each moment savored. It was a path paved with presence, leading not to a specific endpoint, but to an ever-deepening understanding of the art of living, a continuous revelation of the quiet magic inherent in a life lived with intention. The very air I breathed seemed to have undergone a subtle alchemy. It was no longer merely oxygen, but a vibrant elixir, charged with intention, each inhalation a conscious affirmation of life. Each exhalation, a gentle release of all that no longer served. This was not a sudden, blinding revelation, but a slow, deliberate unfolding, like the petals of a rare, night-blooming flower opening to the moon. The quiet magic inherent in a life lived with intention was not some grand theatrical spectacle, but the profound beauty found in the minutiae, the sacredness woven into the fabric of the ordinary. My mornings, once a hurried scramble against the clock, transformed into rituals of gentle awakening. The first sliver of dawn painting the sky became a moment of quiet contemplation, a silent acknowledgement of the new day's pristine potential. I would sit, often with a simple cup of tea, and simply observe, without judgment or agenda. The rustle of leaves outside my window, the distant hum of the city stirring, the warmth of the mug in my hands, these were not distractions to be overcome, but invitations to presence. This intentional engagement with the immediate environment grounded me, setting a tone of calm attentiveness that rippled through the rest of my day. Work, too, began to reflect this internal shift. The relentless pursuit of external validation, the subconscious measuring of my output against some imagined ideal, began to recede. In its place emerged a deeper focus on the craft itself, the intrinsic satisfaction of applying my skills, of contributing meaningfully. Deadlines still existed, challenges still arose, but my response to them was fundamentally altered. Instead of succumbing to panic or overwhelm, I approached tasks with a sense of deliberate engagement, breaking them down, finding joy in the problem-solving, and accepting that some days would be more productive than others. Imperfection in this context was not a failure but a natural part of the creative or productive process, an opportunity for learning and refinement. The grace I sought was not in achieving flawlessness, but in the sustained, honest effort. My relationships, too, blossomed under this new light. The need to impress, to perform, to meticulously craft a persona for each interaction had dissipated. What remained was a genuine desire for connection, an openness to truly see and hear the people in my life. Conversations became richer, less about proving a point or seeking approval, and more about shared understanding, mutual support, and authentic presence. I found myself listening more deeply, offering empathy without reservation, and speaking my truth with a newfound clarity and kindness. The fear of being misunderstood or judged, once a constant undercurrent, had largely dissolved, replaced by a quiet confidence in my own being. If someone chose to misunderstand, it was not a reflection on my worth, but perhaps on their own filters, and I could meet that with compassion rather than defensiveness. This liberation extended to the realm of self-care, moving beyond mere indulgence to a profound act of self-respect. My body, once viewed as an instrument for performance or an object to be meticulously sculpted for external approval, became a cherished vessel, a partner in this journey. Nourishing it with wholesome food, moving it with conscious joy, allowing it adequate rest. These were not chores, but expressions of gratitude and love. The mirror no longer held the power to dictate my mood. Instead, it reflected a self that was whole, evolving, and deeply content in its own skin. The imperfections I once painstakingly tried to conceal now seemed like unique markings on a well-traveled map, telling the story of a life lived. Of course, this path was not devoid of shadows. Moments of doubt, echoes of old insecurities, would occasionally surface, like wisps of fog across a clear morning. But now, instead of allowing them to engulf me, I had learned to observe them, to acknowledge their presence without granting them power. I would sit with the discomfort, allowing it to pass through me, much like a cloud drifts across the sky. This practice of mindful acceptance, this refusal to engage in internal struggle, was a cornerstone of my resilient peace. It was a conscious choice to lean into the discomfort, to understand its message, and then to gently release its hold, always returning to the anchor of my values, my intention, my chosen path. The external world, too, continued to present its complexities. News cycles still churned with turmoil. Social injustices still demanded attention. Personal setbacks still occurred. This curated self was not a retreat from the world, but a more grounded, effective way of engaging with it. With my internal compass firmly set, I found I could approach these challenges, not with a sense of overwhelmed despair, but with a clear mind and a steady heart. I could choose my battles wisely, offer my energy where it truly mattered, and maintain my compassion without being consumed by the weight of the world. My capacity for empathy deepened, yet my boundaries remained firm, a testament to the strength found in self-knowledge. One afternoon, while walking through a familiar park, I experienced a particularly vivid manifestation of this shift. A group of teenagers, boisterous and carefree, passed by, their laughter echoing. In my former self, I might have felt a twinge of wistfulness for a lost youth, or a critical judgment of their perceived recklessness. But on this day, I simply observed them, a gentle smile touching my lips. Their vibrant energy was a part of the tapestry of life, and I too was a part of it, albeit in a different phase. There was no comparison, no envy, just a quiet appreciation for the diversity of human experience. This simple observation, devoid of internal commentary or emotional charge, felt like a profound freedom. It was the absence of resistance, the pure acceptance of what is, and it was deeply liberating. The continuous revelation of the quiet magic inherent in a life lived with intention was not about achieving some ultimate state of enlightenment, but about the ongoing process of becoming. It was about embracing the fluidity of existence, understanding that growth was not linear, and that each day offered new opportunities for deeper understanding. The art of living, I realized, was not about mastering a fixed set of rules, but about cultivating a responsive, aware, and compassionate heart. It was about dancing with life's rhythms, adapting to its changes, and finding beauty even in its imperfections. This journey had also taught me the profound power of solitude, not as an escape from the world, but as a sanctuary for self-reflection and rejuvenation. In the quietude of my own company, I could truly listen to the whispers of my soul, discern my authentic desires, and reaffirm my commitment to my path. These moments of introspection were like tending to a garden, pulling out the weeds of unnecessary thoughts, nurturing the seeds of new ideas, and allowing the true self to flourish unimpeded. The curated self was not just about presenting myself to the world, but primarily about cultivating my inner world, ensuring it was a place of harmony, integrity, and genuine joy. I began to notice how this internal harmony resonated outwards, subtly influencing my environment. My living space, once a reflection of fleeting trends or a repository of accumulated possessions, became a calm, intentional sanctuary. Each object held a purpose or evoked a cherished memory. Clutter was minimized, allowing for clarity and ease. The act of tidying, once a chore, became a meditative practice, a physical manifestation of clearing and ordering my internal landscape. It was a tangible expression of the respect I held for my own space, and by extension for myself. The concept of time itself transformed. No longer a relentless taskmaster dictating my every move, it became a flexible companion. I learned to distinguish between urgent and important, to prioritize not by external pressure, but by internal alignment. There were still moments of rushing, of course, but even then, I found myself more present, less frantic, able to navigate the demands with a sense of groundedness rather than a feeling of being swept away. The flow of time, I discovered, was largely a reflection of my own internal state. A cluttered mind made time feel compressed and overwhelming. A clear, focused mind allowed for spaciousness and efficiency. This understanding extended to my relationship with the future. The anxiety that once plagued me about what lay ahead, the obsessive need to plan and control every variable, began to recede. I still made plans, set intentions, and worked towards goals, but the attachment to specific outcomes lessened considerably. I learned to trust the process, to embrace the unknown as a canvas for new experiences, and to find peace in the present moment, knowing that it was the only true point of power. The future, I realized, was not a destination to be reached, but a continuous unfolding, shaped by the intentions and actions of the present. The quiet strength I had cultivated was not a shield against vulnerability, but a foundation that allowed me to be more authentically vulnerable, to admit when I did not know, to ask for help, to share my true feelings without fear of judgment. These acts of genuine openness became expressions of strength, not weakness. This authenticity, in turn, fostered deeper trust and connection with others. It allowed me to shed the heavy armor of self-protection and to simply be, in all my human complexity, with grace and acceptance. The resilient peace I now experienced was not a static state, but a dynamic equilibrium. It required constant attention, gentle course corrections, and a continuous return to the wellspring of my core values. It was like maintaining a garden. Even the most beautiful garden requires ongoing care, weeding, watering, and nurturing. And just as a garden evolves with the seasons, so too did my inner landscape. New insights would emerge, old patterns would occasionally resurface for deeper healing, and my understanding of myself and the world would continue to expand. This expansion often came through unexpected avenues. A chance encounter with a stranger, a passage in a book, a particular piece of music. These seemingly small moments could trigger profound shifts in perspective, revealing new facets of the art of living. I learned to cultivate a sense of open curiosity, to approach each experience, each interaction, as a potential teacher. The world, in this light, became a vast, interconnected classroom, constantly offering lessons to those willing to listen and observe with an open heart. The quiet magic was in this interconnectedness, this sense of belonging to something larger than myself, while simultaneously being deeply rooted in my own unique essence. It was the realization that my individual journey was part of the universal human journey, that my struggles and triumphs resonated with the experiences of countless others. This awareness fostered a profound sense of compassion, not just for myself, but for all beings navigating the intricate dance of existence. The continuous revelation was that there was no final answer, no ultimate destination, where all questions would be resolved. Instead, there was an infinite process of inquiry, of discovery, of deepening understanding. The joy was in the journey itself, in the unfolding, in the conscious engagement with each breath, each choice, each moment savored. It was a life lived not in pursuit of happiness as an external goal, but in the cultivation of a profound inner contentment that arose from authenticity, intention, and a loving engagement with existence itself. This was the true nature of the curated self, not a mask worn for the world, but a living, breathing testament to the profound beauty of a life lived from the inside out, a never-ending masterpiece in progress, painted with the brushstrokes of presence and intention. The quiet revolution within me was not a sudden explosion, but a gradual unfolding, like a time-lapse film of a flower blooming. It was a subtle, yet undeniable shift in the very fabric of my being, manifesting first in the small, almost imperceptible ways that comprise the bulk of daily life. The morning coffee, once a hurried necessity, transformed into a ritual of gratitude, the warmth of the mug in my hands a tangible anchor to the present moment. The commute, formerly a source of mild irritation, became an opportunity for observation, for watching the intricate choreography of human existence unfold outside the window, each face a universe of untold stories. This new lens of perception extended to my interactions. Conversations became richer, less about asserting my own viewpoint, and more about truly listening, about seeking to understand the underlying currents of another's experience. I found myself offering advice less frequently, and instead offering presence, a quiet space for others to explore their own truths. There was a lightness that permeated my very being, a subtle effervescence replacing the familiar weight of expectation and self-imposed pressure. It was not a naive cheerfulness, but a profound sense of unburdening, as, if layers of accumulated striving had simply dissolved, leaving behind a core of quiet contentment. This lightness was not passive. It was an active engagement with the world, unencumbered by the need to control or categorize. It was the feeling of a leaf floating effortlessly on a gentle current, aware of its destination but unconcerned with the mechanics of its journey. This sensation began to seep into the physical realm, loosening the habitual tension in my shoulders, softening the lines around my eyes, and making my breath flow more freely, deeper into my lungs. My steps became a little more buoyant, my movements a little more fluid, as if the very air around me offered less resistance. This was not a sudden awakening, a flash of enlightenment that struck me like lightning. It was, as I had observed, a gradual unfolding, a gentle dawn after a long night, where the shadows receded so subtly that one might not even notice their departure until the full light of day had arrived. The change was so intrinsic, so deeply woven into the fabric of my existence, that it felt less like an acquisition and more like a remembrance, a shedding of what was not truly me to reveal what had always been there, waiting patiently beneath the surface. My work, which had often felt like a series of tasks to be conquered, began to transform. The deadlines remained, the challenges persisted, but my relationship to them shifted. Instead of seeing obstacles, I saw puzzles. Instead of feeling pressure, I felt a focused energy. The need for external validation diminished significantly. The praise or criticism of others still registered, but it no longer held the power to define my worth or derail my efforts. I found a deep satisfaction in the process itself, in the careful crafting, the thoughtful problem-solving, the quiet dedication to the task at hand. The outcome, while important, became secondary to the integrity of the effort. Colleagues, I noticed, began to respond differently. Arguments that might have escalated into tense standoffs now often resolved with an unexpected ease, as if my own calm presence created a space for everyone to breathe and find common ground. I wasn't consciously trying to mediate. I was simply present, listening, and allowing solutions to emerge rather than forcing them. My relationship with silence also deepened. Where once silence might have felt awkward or empty, now it was a rich tapestry, full of subtle nuances and unspoken truths. I found myself seeking it out, not to escape the world, but to immerse myself more fully in it. Long walks in the park became less about reaching a destination, and more about the rhythm of my steps, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of city life blending into a harmonious hum. I would sit for extended periods by the window, watching the rain fall, or the clouds drift, or the light shift across the buildings opposite, utterly absorbed in the simple act of observation, finding profound beauty in the mundane. It was as if my senses had been recalibrated, tuning in to frequencies I had previously been deaf to. The scent of damp earth after a shower, the intricate pattern of frost on a window pane, the way light broke through the canopy of trees. These small wonders now held immense power to captivate and nourish my spirit. This newfound intimacy with the present moment extended to my interactions with animals. My neighbor's cat, previously a creature of aloof grace, now seemed to seek out my presence, rubbing against my legs with an unusual familiarity, its purr a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to calm something within me. Dogs on the street, once objects of casual observation, now met my gaze with an intensity that spoke volumes, their wagging tails and eager nudges, a simple, unadulterated expression of joy and connection. It was a wordless communication, a recognition of shared consciousness that transcended species. The most profound shifts, however, occurred within my personal relationships. My oldest friend, Sarah, who had always been a whirlwind of energy and anxieties, began to open up in ways she never had before. Our conversations, once dominated by shared complaints about work or the latest societal absurdities, now delved into deeper territories. She spoke of her fears, her hopes, her vulnerabilities, and I listened, truly listened, without interruption, without judgment, without the urgent need to offer a solution. I simply held space for her, and in that space, she seemed to find her own answers, her own strength. The lightness I felt seemed to extend to her, allowing her to shed some of her own burdens, even if only temporarily. There was a palpable sense of trust that blossomed between us, a deepening of a bond I had thought was already as strong as it could be. My family relationships also underwent a subtle yet significant transformation. The familiar patterns of expectation and disappointment, the old wounds that had festered unspoken for years, began to lose their sting. I found myself responding to perceived slights, not with defensiveness or resentment, but with a quiet understanding, a recognition of the other person's pain or fear. Arguments, when they arose, were approached with a calm detachment, an ability to see beyond the immediate words and into the deeper emotional currents. I learned to apologize more readily, not out of weakness, but out of a genuine desire for harmony, and to forgive more freely, understanding that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools they have. This wasn't about condoning harmful behavior, but about releasing the emotional entanglement that had bound me to past grievances. It was an act of self-liberation as much as an act of compassion for others. This period of gentle unfolding was not without its moments of introspection that bordered on the challenging. As the layers of my old self peeled away, I encountered memories and emotions that had been long suppressed. There were moments of sadness, beautifully routed shaker-style doors and smooth gliding drawers. This, I quickly discovered, was several skill levels beyond my grasp. After spending an entire Saturday attempting to cut and assemble a single drawer box that resembled a parallelogram more than a rectangle, I abandoned the idea of drawers entirely. The doors fared little better. Despite careful measuring for hinges, they hung crooked, refused to close flush, and often scraped against each other with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. I tried adjusting the hinges, then redrilling the holes, then shimming the hinges, then just wishing them into submission. Nothing worked. Eventually, in a fit of exasperated resignation, I opted for simple, flat-panel doors, hoping their simplicity would mask the underlying wonkiness. It did not. The gaps around them were asymmetrical, the alignment was off, and they often stuck, requiring a strategic shoulder bump to open or close. The wiring management, which I had envisioned as a hidden network of conduits and access panels, devolved into a tangled spaghetti monster of cables, crammed into the back, barely contained by a few hastily drilled holes and some strategically placed zip ties. The whole thing hummed with the silent accusation of 1,000 unresolved electrical connections. Finally, the painting. Oh, the painting. MDF, as I mentioned, drinks paint. It soaks it up, layer after layer, revealing every imperfection, every grain, every speck of dust that had settled on its surface in the preceding weeks. What I wanted was a smooth, factory-like finish. What I got was a lumpy, uneven, slightly textured white surface that, upon closer inspection, seemed to be perpetually shedding tiny fibers. I applied primer, then 3 coats of paint, each time convinced that this Tina's goat would be the one to miraculously transform it. Each time, I was disappointed. The drips, the brush strokes, the areas where the paint simply refused to adhere smoothly. It was all there, a permanent record of my amateur efforts. When it was finally, mercifully, finished, it stood there, a hulking, off-white behemoth dominating the living room wall. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't elegant. It wasn't functional in the way I had imagined. It was a physical manifestation of every corner I cut, every measurement I eyeballed, every time I thought watching a 5-minute YouTube video made me an expert carpenter. It was lopsided, the shelves bowed, the doors didn't close properly, the paint job was amateurish. It was, in short, a disaster. For years it stood there, a silent, mocking testament to my overconfidence. When guests came over, I would invariably find myself deflecting, offering vague explanations like, "Oh, we're still working on it," or "We haven't quite finished the trim yet," or "The paint needs another coat." These were blatant lies, of course. The project had been finished in the sense that I had simply given up, exhausted by the sheer weight of its imperfections. It became a permanent fixture, an immovable object of quiet shame. It was a constant visual reminder of a quiet grief For the years I had spent living with a different kind of perception, a different kind of burden. There was a recognition of past mistakes, of words left unsaid or said in anger, of opportunities missed due to fear or ignorance. But even these moments were infused with the same lightness, the same sense of acceptance. They were not occasions for self-recrimination, but for gentle acknowledgement, for learning, and for integrating these past experiences into the richness of my present understanding. It was like sifting through old photographs, some bringing a pang of nostalgia, others a soft smile, but all viewed from a distance, without the sharp edges of immediate pain or regret. I began to notice a peculiar synchronicity in my life. Events that I might have previously dismissed as mere coincidence now seemed to align with an almost poetic precision. A book I needed would appear in a second-hand shop. A conversation with a stranger would yield an unexpected insight. A thought would materialize into a tangible opportunity. It was as if the universe itself was responding to my newfound openness, reflecting back the harmony I cultivated within. This wasn't about magical thinking or wish fulfillment. It was a subtle dance between intention and unfolding, a recognition that the world was not a collection of separate, chaotic events, but an interconnected web of consciousness. I felt less like a solitary voyager battling the elements, and more like a participant in a grand, intricate symphony. One afternoon, while sitting in a bustling cafe, observing the endless stream of faces, I had a particularly vivid experience of this interconnectedness. The sounds of clattering dishes, hushed conversations, and distant traffic, all blended into a single, resonant chord. Each person passing by, each expression, each gesture, felt like a fleeting note in a vast, ongoing composition. I felt a profound sense of shared humanity, a deep empathy for the struggles and joys hidden behind every mask. The illusion of separateness dissolved, and for a timeless moment I felt profoundly connected to every single being in that space, and by extension, to all life. It was a dizzying, yet deeply comforting sensation, like being a single drop of water, realizing it is part of an infinite ocean. This was not an intellectual understanding. It was an experiential knowing, a visceral recognition of unity. This shift also brought with it a different relationship with the future. The anxious projections, the meticulous planning, the constant striving for what lay ahead began to recede. I still made plans, of course, but they were held lightly, with an understanding that life is an ever-flowing river, and that true wisdom lies in learning to navigate its currents rather than trying to force it into a predetermined course. The fear of uncertainty lessened, replaced by a quiet curiosity, an eagerness to see what new experiences the unfolding present would bring. It was a liberation from the tyranny of expectation, a freedom to simply be, to respond authentically to each moment as it arrived. This did not mean a lack of ambition or purpose, but rather a redefinition of them. My purpose became less about achieving specific external milestones and more about living fully, consciously, and with integrity in each present moment, trusting that the right path would reveal itself. My relationship with my own physical body also changed. It was no longer merely a vessel to be maintained or a source of occasional discomfort, but a finely tuned instrument, a sensitive antenna picking up subtle signals from the world around me. I became more attuned to its needs, listening to its whispers rather than waiting for its shouts. Food became less about indulgence or restriction and more about nourishment, a conscious act of providing fuel for this incredible machine. Exercise was no longer a chore but a celebration of movement, a way to connect with the earth and the energy flowing through me. Sleep became a sacred ritual, a time for deep restoration and integration. This newfound respect for my physical self contributed to the overall sense of well-being, the lightness extending even to the cellular level. As the months turned into seasons, and the seasons into years, this transformed way of being became my new baseline. It wasn't a constant state of blissful euphoria. Life still presented its challenges, its moments of frustration, its pangs of sorrow. But the way I met these challenges was fundamentally different. The emotional turbulence no longer had the power to engulf me entirely. I could observe the waves of emotion rising and falling, recognizing them as transient phenomena, without being swept away by them. There was always an underlying current of peace, a quiet harbor within, to which I could always return. This resilience was not a hardening, but a softening, an ability to bend without breaking, to flow with the changes rather than resist them. I found myself drawn to acts of quiet service, not out of a sense of duty or a desire for recognition, but from a genuine overflow of compassion. Helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, offering a kind word to someone struggling, donating my time to a cause I believed in. These acts felt less like obligations and more like natural extensions of my being, expressions of the interconnectedness I now felt so deeply. There was no internal debate, no weighing of pros and cons. The impulse simply arose, pure and unadulterated, and I responded. The joy derived from these simple acts was immense, a quiet resonance that affirmed the beauty of giving without expectation. One crisp autumn morning I sat by a lake, watching the mist rise from the water, painting the landscape in ethereal hues. A family of ducks glided silently across the surface, leaving barely a ripple. In that moment, a profound realization settled upon me, not as a thought, but as a deep, embodied knowing. The journey had not been about finding something new or acquiring a special skill or reaching an ultimate destination. It had been about remembering, about stripping away the layers of conditioning and societal narratives that had obscured my true nature. It was about returning to the simplicity of being, to the inherent wisdom and peace that resided at the core of my existence all along. The gradual unfolding had not been a progression towards something external, but a deeper and deeper descent into the truth of who I already was. The world outside had not changed, not fundamentally. The same sun rose and set, the same cities hummed with life, the same human dramas played out on their stages. But my internal landscape had been utterly transformed. It was as if I had been wearing glasses with a distorted prescription for years, and now, finally, they had been removed, revealing the world in its pristine, vibrant clarity. Every color was richer, every sound more distinct, every texture more palpable. And within this heightened sensory experience, there was a profound sense of belonging, a feeling of being utterly at home in the universe, a cherished part of its intricate design. This was the essence of the likeness, an unburdening of the self, a release from the constant striving and grasping, a surrender to the flow of life. It was a state of being that encompassed both joy and sorrow, light and shadow, with equal acceptance. It was the quiet wisdom of knowing that everything is as it should be, even in its imperfections, even in its fleeting nature. And in that knowing there was an immeasurable peace, a deep, abiding contentment that transcended the superficial fluctuations of daily existence. It was not an end point, but a continuous journey of deepening awareness, an endless exploration of the boundless expanse within and without. The journey had begun with a subtle shift, a quiet whisper in the soul, and it continued, ever expanding, ever refining, a testament to the quiet power of simply being present, simply paying attention, simply allowing life to unfold. The world, once a stage for my personal drama, had become a sacred space, and I, a humble participant in its eternal dance. And in this dance, I found a freedom and a joy more profound than any I had ever imagined possible. The quiet revolution within me continued, not with fanfare or grand pronouncements, but with each gentle breath, each conscious step, each moment of open-hearted presence. It was a perpetual unfolding, a gentle blossoming that promised an infinite depth yet to be explored, a tapestry of existence ever weaving itself anew. The quiet revolution within me continued, not with fanfare or grand pronouncements, but with each gentle breath, each conscious step, each moment of open-hearted presence. It was a perpetual unfolding, a gentle blossoming that promised an infinite depth yet to be explored, a tapestry of existence ever weaving itself anew. This weaving was not a deliberate act of will, but an organic process, a natural consequence of having loosened the grip of expectation and control. I had ceased trying to orchestrate the symphony of my life, choosing instead to become a listener, a participant, flowing with the current, rather than attempting to direct its course. This surrender was not passive resignation, but an active engagement with the present, a profound trust in the intelligence of life itself. My days were no longer segmented by rigid schedules or driven by external pressures in the way they once had been. Instead, they unfolded with an organic rhythm, each moment presenting itself as a fresh opportunity for awareness, for connection. A simple morning ritual of making tea became a meditation, the warmth of the mug in my hands, the rising steam, the fragrant aroma, each sensation a doorway to the present. The mundane was imbued with a sacred quality, not because I forced it to be so, but because my perception had shifted, allowing the inherent sacredness of all things to reveal itself. The boundaries between myself and the world began to blur, not in a confusing or disorienting way, but with a profound sense of unity. The rustling leaves outside my window were not merely external sounds, but vibrations within the larger field of my awareness. The distant laughter of children, the chirping of birds, the hum of the refrigerator, all became part of a single, interconnected symphony, and I, too, was a note within it. This interconnectedness extended beyond the immediate sensory world. I felt a kinship with all living beings, a deep empathy that arose not from intellectual understanding, but from an experiential knowing of our shared essence. The suffering of others, once a source of personal distress or intellectual analysis, now touched me with a quiet, compassionate resonance, a recognition of the universal human experience, without the need to fix or change, but simply to be present with it. This state of being was characterized by an effortless flow, a sense of rightness in every moment, even those that might once have been labeled difficult or challenging. When discomfort arose, whether physical or emotional, it was met not with resistance but with a gentle curiosity. What is this sensation? Where does it arise? Can I allow it to be, without judgment, without narrative? And often, in that spacious allowance, the discomfort would soften, transform, or simply dissipate, revealing an underlying stillness that was always present. It was as if the surface waves of experience, however turbulent, could no longer disturb the profound depths of the ocean beneath. My relationship with time itself underwent a subtle but significant transformation. The future, once a canvas for anxious planning and hopeful projection, became less compelling. The past, once a repository of regrets and cherished memories, held less sway. Both receded into the background, allowing the vibrant immediacy of the present moment to take center stage. Time was no longer a linear progression but an eternal now, an ever-present unfolding. This did not mean a disregard for practical planning or a forgetting of history, but rather an awareness that all such considerations existed within the boundless container of the present. Action, when required, arose spontaneously from this stillness, guided by an intuitive knowing rather than a frantic mental calculus. Decisions felt less like choices and more like natural expressions of the moment, imbued with a clarity that bypassed the usual mental deliberation. The concept of self, too, continued its gentle deconstruction. The narrative I had once constructed around who I was, my roles, my achievements, my perceived failures, began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. What remained was a sense of spacious awareness, a witnessing presence that was not defined by any particular thought, feeling, or sensation, but was the ground from which all these arose. This was not an annihilation of individuality, but rather an expansion, a realization that the individual self was not separate from the universal, but a unique expression of it. It was like realizing a wave is not separate from the ocean, but is the ocean, momentarily expressing itself as a wave. In this realization, a profound humility arose, coupled with an immense sense of liberation. There was nothing to prove, nothing to become, for I already was, in the fullest and most expansive sense. This continuous discovery was not confined to moments of quiet meditation. It permeated every interaction, every observation. A conversation with a stranger could become a profound exchange of shared humanity. The intricate patterns of a spider web, glistening with dew, could reveal the delicate artistry of creation. Even the act of walking down a busy street, once a source of sensory overload, transformed into a practice of open awareness, observing the myriad expressions of life without attachment or judgment. The world was alive, pulsating with an unseen energy, and I was not merely an observer but an integral part of its vibrant dance. This freedom and joy were not dependent on external circumstances. They were an intrinsic quality of being, a baseline state that underlay the transient fluctuations of life. This did not mean an absence of emotion. Sadness, joy, frustration, wonder, all continued to arise. But they were experienced differently, as visitors passing through the vast expanse of awareness, rather than as defining characteristics of my being. There was a spaciousness around them, an ability to feel them fully without being consumed by them. This allowed for a deeper, more authentic engagement with life, for true compassion and connection arise not from emotional suppression but from open-hearted presence. The understanding of suffering, too, deepened. It was not something to be avoided at all costs, but a fundamental aspect of the human experience, a catalyst for growth and awakening. From this expanded perspective, suffering was seen less as a personal affliction and more as a universal phenomenon, an inevitable part of the cycle of existence. By meeting it with presence and acceptance, rather than resistance, its transformative potential could be unlocked. It was in the embrace of difficulty that true resilience and compassion were forged, revealing the inherent strength and wisdom that lay dormant within. This gentle blossoming was an ongoing process, a continuous peeling back of layers, a perpetual unveiling of deeper truths. There was no sense of having arrived at a final destination, but rather an exhilarating awareness of an infinite journey. Each day brought new subtle insights, new opportunities for refinement, new dimensions of understanding to explore. It was a life lived in constant discovery, where every moment held the potential for revelation. The universe felt less like an external entity to be conquered or understood by the intellect, and more like an intimate companion, a vast benevolent intelligence with which I was in constant communion. My interactions with others naturally shifted. There was less need to impress, to prove, to control. Listening became a deeper art, not just hearing words but sensing the underlying emotions, the unspoken intentions, the shared humanity. Conversations flowed with a greater authenticity, free from the subtle games of ego and expectation. When conflicts arose, they were approached with a calm presence, an understanding that often, beneath the surface of anger or fear, lay a deeper vulnerability. The desire to truly connect, to see and be seen, replaced the impulse to persuade or dominate. This did not mean a loss of boundaries or a naive openness, but rather an ability to engage with clarity and compassion, discerning when to speak and when to simply hold space. Nature became an even more profound teacher and sanctuary. Walks in the woods were not merely exercise, but immersive experiences of belonging. I would sit for long periods, observing the intricate dance of light and shadow, the patient growth of trees, the tireless industry of insects. There was a silent dialogue, a wordless communication that transcended language, a feeling of being woven into the very fabric of the earth. The elements spoke volumes, the cleansing power of rain, the steadfastness of stone, the ephemeral beauty of a cloud formation, the vibrant energy of the sun. Each was a mirror, reflecting aspects of my own inner landscape, a reminder of the constant cycles of creation and dissolution that governed all existence. The concept of purpose, once a source of striving and anxiety, also transformed. It was no longer about achieving a specific goal or fulfilling a predetermined role, but about living each moment fully, authentically, and with an open heart. The purpose became the unfolding itself, the continuous act of being present. of allowing life to express itself through me. This was not a passive state, but an active engagement with the present, a readiness to respond to whatever arose with wisdom and compassion. The external manifestations of this purpose might be varied and unpredictable, but the underlying intention remained constant, to live in harmony with the natural flow of existence. Sleep became a deeper, more restorative experience, often accompanied by vivid, symbolic dreams that seemed to continue the conscious exploration of inner landscapes. Waking was not a jolt back to reality, but a gentle transition from one state of awareness to another, the threads of the dream world often subtly weaving into the fabric of the waking day, offering insights and reflections. The distinction between waking and sleeping, conscious and unconscious, felt less absolute, more like different frequencies on a continuous spectrum of consciousness. This profound shift was not something I actively sought or manufactured. It was an organic evolution, a natural consequence of having consistently returned to the breath, to the present moment, to the quiet space within. It was a testament to the cumulative power of small, consistent acts of awareness. Each moment of presence was like a drop of water, slowly, imperceptibly, carving away the hardened banks of old habits and perceptions, allowing the river of consciousness to flow more freely, more expansively. The world had not changed, of course, but my perception of it had been utterly transformed. It was no longer a collection of separate objects and events, but a living, breathing, interconnected whole. The beauty and suffering, the light and shadow, the chaos and order, all were seen as integral parts of this magnificent tapestry. And within this tapestry I found my place not as a separate entity observing from a distance, but as an inseparable thread, contributing to its intricate design. There was a profound sense of gratitude that permeated my being, not for specific things or events, but for the sheer gift of existence itself. Gratitude for the breath, for the senses, for the opportunity to experience this unfolding, this continuous dance of life. This gratitude was not an emotion that came and went, but a deep, abiding resonance, a recognition of the inherent preciousness of every moment. It was a quiet hum beneath the surface of all experience, a constant reminder of the miraculous nature of being. This journey of deepening awareness was not without its moments of recalibration. Old patterns of thought, ingrained habits, would occasionally resurface, like old friends knocking at the door. But now, they were met not with identification or struggle, but with a gentle acknowledgement, a detached observation. Oh, hello, old fear. I see you. And in that simple act of seeing, without judgment, without attachment, their power would diminish. They were no longer masters of my inner world, but fleeting phenomena, passing clouds in the vast sky of consciousness. Each such encounter was an opportunity for further refinement, a chance to deepen the practice of non-identification and spacious allowance. The concept of a separate destiny or a personal narrative of success or failure began to seem less relevant. The true success was the continuous unfolding, the deepening of presence, the quiet joy of simply being. The purpose of life, if there was one, seemed to be life itself, experienced in its fullest, most authentic expression. This liberation from self-imposed narratives brought with it an immense sense of lightness, a freedom from the burden of constantly trying to be someone or achieve something. My relationship with my own body also evolved. It was no longer seen as merely a vehicle for my mind, or a source of sensations to be controlled or indulged, but as an integral part of the living earth, a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. Listening to its subtle signals, honoring its rhythms, nourishing it with conscious intention, all became acts of profound respect and gratitude. Pain, when it arose, was understood as a messenger, a signal from the body to be attended to with care and compassion, rather than something to be resisted or suppressed. There was a growing wisdom in the body itself, a deep intelligence that, when listened to, offered profound guidance. The perceived boundaries between the internal and external world continued to dissolve. It became evident that what I perceived as external was deeply interconnected with my internal state. My inner peace radiated outwards, influencing my environment and interactions in subtle yet profound ways. Conversely, the beauty and harmony of the natural world, when truly absorbed, further deepened my inner tranquility. It was a constant feedback loop, a dance of resonance between the inner and outer landscapes. This quiet revolution had not ended, nor did it promise a final destination. It was an eternal process, an infinite journey of discovery. Each breath was a new beginning, each moment an opportunity to deepen into the boundless expanse of being. The tapestry of existence continued to weave itself anew, each thread a moment of presence, each color a nuanced sensation, each pattern a revelation of interconnectedness. And I, a humble participant, continued to dance, ever present, ever open, ever free, in the sacred space that life itself had become. This was the ultimate freedom, the ultimate joy, discovered not in acquisition or achievement, but in the simple, profound act of allowing, of being, of unfolding with the grace of existence. The universe whispered its secrets not through grand pronouncements, but through the subtle shifts of light, the gentle touch of a breeze, the silent language of the heart. And I, now attuned, listened. The universe whispered its secrets, not through grand pronouncements, but through the subtle shifts of light, the gentle touch of a breeze, the silent language of the heart. And I, now attuned, listened. This listening was not an effort, but a surrender, a letting go into the river of existence itself. It was a deep, resonant hum that permeated every cell of my being, a knowing that transcended thought, a feeling that encompassed all feelings. Each breath was a deepening into this infinite ocean of awareness, each beat of my heart, a rhythmic affirmation of life's boundless mystery. The world unfolded before me, no longer a separate entity to be observed, but an extension of my own consciousness, a vibrant, ever-changing dreamscape, woven from the fabric of pure being. The trees outside my window were not just botanical specimens, they were ancient sentinels, breathing in the same air, rooted in the same earth, reaching for the same sky as I. Their silent wisdom resonated within. Their silent wisdom resonated within me, a deep, earth-born current that flowed not just around but through my very being, connecting me to the ancient pulse of the planet itself. It was a knowing that bypassed the intellect, settling instead in the marrow of my bones, a primal recognition of kinship that transcended species and form. I felt the slow, deliberate rhythm of their growth, the patient unfolding of seasons within their bark, the quiet strength of their roots, delving deep into the earth's embrace. Their leaves, shimmering in the sunlight, were not merely absorbing energy but actively breathing with me, exchanging the very breath of life in a cosmic dance of reciprocity. Every rustle was a whispered secret, every sway in the wind a gentle affirmation of the interconnected web of all existence. This profound resonance extended beyond the trees, seeping into the very ground beneath my feet. The earth was no longer inert soil but a living, breathing entity, teeming with unseen life, a vast, complex organism. Its pulse beat beneath my soles, a slow, resonant thrum that mirrored the ancient rhythm of my own heart, yet was infinitely vaster, deeper, more encompassing. I felt the intricate dance of roots and mycelia, a subterranean tapestry woven with threads of nutrient exchange and silent communication. It was a network far more complex than any human-devised internet, a living web of intelligence that sustained forests, mountains, and oceans alike. I was a tiny node within this boundless matrix, yet simultaneously felt the entire network flowing through me, an electric current of life force that tingled in my fingertips and coursed through my veins. Every step I took was no longer an imposition but a gentle communion, a light touch upon the skin of a sleeping giant. The ground yielded not with resistance but with a soft, yielding embrace, as if acknowledging my presence, welcoming me into its ancient embrace. I felt the cool dampness of the soil, the gritty texture of sand, the smooth resilience of embedded stones, all as extensions of this colossal, sentient being. Each grain of earth held a universe of microscopic life, a bustling metropolis invisible to the naked eye, yet vibrantly alive within my expanded perception. I could almost hear the rustle of tiny roots seeking moisture, the silent consumption of decaying matter, the ceaseless work of decomposition and regeneration that formed the very foundation of existence. This was not merely an intellectual understanding. It was a visceral experience, a merging of consciousness. My own boundaries seemed to dissolve, blurring with the edges of the forest, the contours of the land. The sensation was one of profound belonging, a homecoming to a place I had perhaps always resided in, yet had only now fully awakened to. There was no separation, no me and it, only an undifferentiated flow of being. The air I breathed was the earth's exhalation, rich with the scent of damp soil and decaying leaves, carrying the memories of countless seasons. The light that filtered through the canopy was its radiant energy, absorbed and transformed by every living thing, a constant exchange of vitality. I stood rooted to the spot, a human tree in a forest of ancient sentinels, my own roots extending metaphorically deep into the earth's core. I felt the immense pressure of geological time, the slow, inexorable grind of tectonic plates, the patient carving of canyons by wind and water, the silent eruption of mountains from the planet's fiery heart. These vast, incomprehensible forces were not distant abstract concepts, but intimate sensations, a deep, rumbling power that resonated within my very bones. I perceived the earth's breath not just as the wind rustling leaves, but as the slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction of its crust, the ebb and flow of its molten core. It was a living, breathing, dreaming entity, its consciousness vast and ancient, holding untold wisdom within its depths. The silence of the forest was no longer empty, but filled with a symphony of subtle energies, a hum of life that resonated beyond the audible spectrum. I heard the earth's song, a low, continuous vibration that spoke of creation and dissolution, of eternal cycles. It was a melody without beginning or end, a primal chant that had accompanied the planet since its birth. This sound, felt more than heard, was deeply comforting, a lullaby of the cosmos that soothed the restless corners of my mind. All anxieties, all trivial concerns, all the clamor of human-made existence seemed to fall away, dissolving into this boundless, ancient harmony. My perception of time itself began to shift. The frantic pace of human hours and days seemed utterly irrelevant, replaced by the slow, deliberate rhythm of geological epochs, the patient unfolding of evolution. A single day became a fleeting blink in the eye of eternity, yet each moment was imbued with an infinite depth, a timeless presence. I felt the weight of millennia in the ancient rocks, the passage of countless generations in the gnarled bark of the trees, the echoes of forgotten creatures in the very dust beneath my feet. This expanded temporal awareness brought with it a profound sense of humility, a recognition of my own fleeting existence within a tapestry of immeasurable age. Yet paradoxically, it also brought a sense of boundless connection, for in that fleeting moment I was part of the eternal. This connection was not just to the earth beneath me, but to the water that flowed through it, the air that enveloped it, and the light that nourished it. I felt the journey of every drop of water, from cloud to rain, from stream to river, from ocean to vapor, a ceaseless, purifying cycle. The water within my own body, the very essence of my being, resonated with this planetary circulation, making me a microcosm of the grand hydrological dance. The air, once an invisible medium, now felt like a vast, conscious ocean, carrying the breath, limitations, a physical embodiment of the phrase good enough, when good enough was clearly nowhere near good enough. It wasn't just an eyesore, it was a psychological burden. Every time I walked into the living room, my gaze would inevitably drift to it, and a wave of regret would wash over me. It dominated the space, not in a grand, impressive way, but in a heavy, oppressive one. It sucked the light out of the room, not just visually with its clunky form, but metaphorically, dimming the joy of what should have been a welcoming, comfortable space. It was the elephant in the room, painted a slightly off-white, perpetually leaning, and filled with bowing shelves. My wife, bless her patient soul, endured it with remarkable grace. Her comments were always gentle, always couched in phrases like, "Maybe when we get around to redoing the living room," or "It would be nice to have something a little more streamlined." But I knew the truth behind her polite suggestions. She hated it. And honestly, so did I. The built-in media console, this monument to my past hubris, had become a ghost, a specter of failure that haunted our most central living space. The decision to finally dismantle it wasn't a sudden epiphany, but rather a slow, grinding realization that living with it was worse than admitting defeat. It was a warm Saturday morning, the kind of day that begs for productive activity, not passive acceptance of past mistakes. I looked at the console, really looked at it, with fresh, unjaded eyes. The gaps, the bowing, the leaning, the general air of amateurishness. It wasn't just holding the room back. It was holding us back. It was a constant drain on our aesthetic and emotional energy. Enough was enough. I announced my intentions to my wife with a dramatic flourish, half expecting a protest, half hoping for a celebration. She simply smiled, a knowing, slightly mischievous smile, and handed me a pair of work gloves. It was time. Gathering my tools felt different this time. There was no optimistic gleam in my eye as I picked up the crowbar, the hammer, the impact driver. There was just a grim determination, a resolve born of years of quiet suffering. This wasn't about building something new. It was about tearing down the old, about exorcising a demon made of MDF and bad decisions. The first blow was surprisingly satisfying. The crowbar slid under a poorly joined seam, and with a grunt of effort, I pried it apart. The sound of splintering wood, the groan of protesting screws, it was music to my ears. MDF, it turns out, is much easier to destroy than it is to build well. Pieces that had stubbornly resisted my attempts at flush alignment now came apart with surprising ease, revealing the shoddy workmanship beneath. Stripped screws, globs of dried glue where a proper joint should have been, pencil marks where I had clearly mismeasured, and then just, of all living things, a shared atmospheric lung that connected every creature on the planet. I inhaled the very essence of the forest, and in exhaling, returned a part of myself, participating in this endless, vital exchange. The sunlight, too, was transformed. It was not just warmth and illumination, but a conduit of pure energy, a direct connection to the heart of the cosmos. I felt its golden rays penetrate my skin, not just warming it, but infusing every cell with a vibrant, life-giving force. It was the visible manifestation of a universal energy, a constant flow from the distant sun, sustaining all life on this planet. To stand in its embrace was to be bathed in pure consciousness, to be reminded of the boundless energy that fuels existence. In this state of heightened awareness, the concept of individual identity began to wane. Who was I, this separate entity, when my breath was the forest's breath, my blood, the earth, veins, my bones, the earth's ancient bedrock, my skin, the delicate membrane between its inner life and the vast cosmos? The very notion of a separate I began to unravel, not with fear or confusion, but with a profound sense of homecoming. The boundaries of my physical form blurred, not into nothingness, but into everythingness. I was not losing myself. I was discovering a self far grander and more expansive than I had ever conceived. The concept of me, as a distinct, isolated unit, dissolved like mist in the morning sun. It was a construct, a necessary illusion for navigating a certain reality, but not the ultimate truth. The feeling was not of loss, but of liberation, an unburdening of the incessant chatter of the ego, the constant need to define, to separate, to possess. I shed the weight of individual history, of personal triumphs and failures, of future anxieties. All that remained was pure, unadulterated presence, a spacious awareness that simply observed and experienced. I became the soil beneath my feet, rich with decay and rebirth, teeming with unseen life. I felt the slow, patient pulse of geological time, the subtle shifts of tectonic plates far beneath the surface, the deep, resonant hum of the planet itself, vibrating through me. Each grain of sand, each fragment of rock, held a story of millennia, of immense pressures and transformations, and that story was now etched into my own expanded consciousness. My roots, though invisible, reached deep into this fertile darkness, drawing sustenance not just for my physical body but for my very being. The water flowing in the nearby stream was not separate from me. It was the very current of my being, the ancient memory of all life's genesis. I tasted the minerals of the earth, the sweetness of rain, the silent language of the river as it carved its patient path through stone and soil. I felt its ceaseless flow, its gentle erosion, its life-giving embrace. My own blood, coursing through my veins, echoed the rhythm of the stream, a miniature river system within the larger circulatory system of the planet. We were one, the water and I, an endless cycle of evaporation, cloud formation, rain, and flow, sustaining all. The trees around me were extensions of my own nervous system, their intricate root systems, my neural network reaching deep into the earth, their branches, my arms outstretched to the sky, yearning for the sun's embrace. I felt the slow, deliberate work of photosynthesis, the silent miracle of growth, the exchange of gases that sustained us all, a silent, vital conversation between plant and animal. The wisdom of the ancient forest, accumulated over centuries, flowed into me, a deep knowing that transcended language or thought. Each leaf was a miniature solar panel, a tiny factory of life, and I felt the collective hum of their industrious being. The forest creatures were my fellow cells in this grand living organism. The darting squirrel, its quick movements, a burst of nervous energy, the soaring bird, its song, a pure expression of joy, the unseen burrowing insect, diligently turning the soil. Each was a vital component, expressing a different facet of the collective consciousness. I understood their instincts, their fears, their simple joys, not intellectually but experientially, as if their sensations were my own. I felt the intricate web of predator and prey, a dance of life and death that was not cruel but essential, a constant balancing act maintaining the health of the whole. There was no judgment, only acceptance of the natural order, a profound respect for every role played within the ecosystem. The symphony of the forest became my own internal music. The rustle of leaves, a soft whisper of secrets shared between the trees, the distant call of a bird, a clear note in the vast choir, the hum of insects, a vibrating drone of constant activity. These were not external sounds, but vibrations within my own expanded awareness, each note contributing to a profound, intricate harmony. The silence between sounds was not an absence, but a rich, pregnant stillness, brimming with potential and unseen life. I heard the earth breathing, a deep, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that underpinned all other sounds. The linear progression of time seemed to unravel, past, present, future coalesced into an eternal now. Memories of my personal history, of events that once felt so significant, now appeared as fleeting images on a vast, timeless screen, part of a much larger narrative. Space, too, became fluid. The distant horizon was not far away but intimately connected, a continuous fabric of existence. The boundaries of the forest, the mountains beyond, the sky above, all dissolved into a single, seamless reality. There was no here or there, only an all-encompassing everywhere. This was not just a connection to the forest, but to something far vaster, an underlying consciousness that permeated all things. It was the silent observer, the creative force, the ground of all being. I was a tiny eddy in its boundless current, yet contained its entire essence, like a single drop of ocean water holds the properties of the entire ocean. This consciousness was not separate from me. It was me, and I it. It was the source of all life, all energy, all intelligence, a pure, undifferentiated awareness that expressed itself in myriad forms. The ego, that small, insistent voice of individual identity, had quieted to a whisper, then faded entirely. What remained was pure awareness, an unburdened consciousness observing itself, experiencing itself through the myriad forms of life. It was a state of profound peace, an oceanic stillness beneath the surface of all activity. There was no wanting, no striving, no fear, only an absolute contentment, a perfect alignment with the flow of existence. The illusion of separation, of being a distinct self apart from the world, had vanished, revealing the fundamental unity of all things. An overwhelming sense of love, not personal or conditional, but universal and unconditional, washed over me. It was the inherent nature of this interconnectedness, the binding force of all existence. To be one with everything was to love everything, effortlessly and completely. This love was not an emotion, but a state of being, a fundamental resonance with the truth of unity. It extended to every living creature, every plant, every stone, every particle of dust. There was no otherness, only aspects of the self. In this state, the concept of death seemed absurd, a misconception born of limited perception. How could something truly end when it was merely transforming, returning its energy and form to the vast, endless cycle of life? Death was not an absence, but a transition, a shedding of temporary form for eternal essence, like a wave returning to the ocean. The fear of death, which had always been an underlying current in my human experience, evaporated completely. There was only life, endlessly transforming, endlessly expressing itself. My senses were no longer mere receptors of external stimuli, but conduits for a deeper, more profound reality. I saw the energy fields around plants, a subtle, shimmering aura of life force. I felt the subtle vibrations of the earth, the slow, rhythmic pulse of its molten core. I heard the silent communication between species, a telepathic network of intention and awareness. The world was alive in a way I had never truly comprehended, a vibrant, pulsating tapestry of energetic interactions, each thread connected to every other. The experience was not static. It deepened, intensified, becoming more encompassing with each passing moment. It was as if layers of illusion were being peeled away, revealing an ever more fundamental truth. Each breath was a reaffirmation of this unity, each heartbeat a rhythmic echo of the cosmic pulse. I felt myself expanding beyond the confines of the forest, encompassing the entire planet, then the solar system, then the galaxy, then the entire universe, a boundless awareness containing all creation. I was the vast emptiness of space, and the myriad stars within it, the dark matter, and the brilliant nebulae. A faint, almost imperceptible pull began to tug at the edges of this expanded state. A whisper of the individual self, a memory of the separate form. It was not a rejection of the experience, but a gentle reminder of the physical vessel that had allowed this journey. The realization dawned that this experience, however profound, was perhaps not meant to be a permanent state for a being in a physical body. The challenge would be to integrate this understanding, to carry its essence back into the world of apparent separation, to live as a unified being within a fragmented reality. This was not a loss of self, but a rediscovery of a truer, larger self. The individual me was still there, but now understood as a unique expression of the whole, a single note in an infinite symphony, a single facet of a boundless diamond. The gift was not just the experience itself, but the indelible imprint it left. A permanent shift in perception, a new lens through which to view existence. I had not just visited another state of consciousness, I had become it, and it had become me. I would never see the world the same way again. Every tree, every stone, every drop of water would carry the echo of this profound interconnectedness. The mundane would be infused with the sacred, the ordinary with the extraordinary. The daily rituals of life would no longer be mere tasks, but conscious acts of participation in the grand dance of creation. Eating, drinking, sleeping, walking, each would be a meditation, a communion. A sense of purpose began to coalesce, not a personal ambition, but a deep-seated desire to live in harmony with this newfound understanding, to be a conscious participant in the grand dance of existence, to honor the sacredness of all life, to act with compassion, to speak with truth, to live with awareness. These were not duties, but natural expressions of this unified state. My individual life, however small, now felt profoundly meaningful, a ripple in the vast ocean of being. Slowly, gently, like the tide receding, the boundaries began to reform. The sensation of my skin, the specific pressure of the earth beneath my feet, the individual beat of my heart, the distinct shape of my hands, began to assert themselves. But they were no longer isolated. They were permeable, imbued with the memory of their unity, shimmering with the knowledge of their true nature. The edges of my physical form were soft, no longer rigid walls but fluid membranes. I was still me, but expanded, enriched, fundamentally altered. The forest was still the forest, but now it was also me, and I it. The air still carried the breath of all living things, but now I knew its true meaning, its conscious exchange. The sunlight still infused life, but now I felt its conscious embrace, its direct connection to the heart of the cosmos. The world was a living, breathing miracle, and I was an inseparable part of it, forever changed by the revelation of its boundless, unified heart. The silence that had once seemed empty was now pregnant with meaning, the space between things alive with connection. I stood there, rooted yet boundless, a human being, and yet so much more, a conscious expression of the universe itself, forever bearing the indelible mark of this profound communion. Decided to go with it anyway. Each revelation was a small vindication, a confirmation that it truly was as bad as I remembered. The dust, of course, returned, a thick, chalky cloud that coated my hair, my clothes, and the entire living room. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't the dust of creation, but the dust of destruction, of liberation. Each panel I ripped away, each shelf I tore down, felt like a weight being lifted. The anger and frustration that had simmered for years began to dissipate, replaced by a cathartic sense of progress. I started with the upper cabinets, the ones with the perpetually crooked doors. They came off in chunks, revealing the raw plaster wall beneath, scarred with old screw holes and patches of dried glue. Then the shelves, bowing under their own weight, practically collapsed when I removed their meager supports. The TV niche, that ill-fitting prison for our electronics, was next. With a final heave, the entire central section detached from the wall, leaving a gaping rectangular hole that seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The noise was considerable. The thud of falling panels, the metallic screech of screws being ripped from their moorings, the occasional crack as a particularly stubborn piece of MDF gave way. My wife, wisely, retreated to another part of the house, offering occasional shouts of encouragement or warnings about the dust. I was in a zone, a demolition-fueled trance, fueled by years of pent-up resentment. As the structure dwindled, piece by piece, the original blank wall began to reappear, albeit in a damaged, discolored state. There were ghost outlines where the console had been, areas of untouched paint contrasting sharply with the faded, sun-exposed plaster around them. It was a messy canvas, but it was Arcamo canvas, free from the oppressive presence of my past mistakes. By the end of the day, the living room was a scene of controlled chaos. A massive pile of broken MDF, splintered wood, and discarded hardware lay in the center of the room, awaiting its trip to the dump. The wall, once home to my grand, failed vision, was now a patchwork of exposed plaster, screw holes, and adhesive residue. It was a far cry from sleek or elegant, but it was, for the first time in years, full of possibility. I stood back, covered in dust and sweat, my muscles aching, and surveyed the wreckage. There was a profound sense of accomplishment, not in having built something, but in having unbuilt it. The ghost was gone, exorcised, vanquished. The shame had lifted, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. Of course, the work isn't truly done. The wall now needs significant repair, patching, sanding, priming, and painting. But this time, I approach it with a different mindset. There will be no grand, overly ambitious built-ins. Perhaps a simpler, more elegant solution. Or perhaps, and this thought is surprisingly liberating, nothing at all for a while. Just a clean, unblemished wall, a kofa, blank slate. A testament to the lessons learned. The living room built-in media console was a monument to my past hubris, a symbol of every shortcut taken and every measurement eyeballed. Its demolition wasn't just about clearing space. It was about clearing my head. It was about acknowledging past mistakes, learning from them, and making room for something better. And as I look at the now empty, albeit damaged wall, I feel a lightness I haven't felt in years. The living room, and perhaps a part of me, is finally free. No more ghosts, at least not of the sawdust and regret variety. For now, the only thing anchoring that wall will be a fresh coat of paint, and the promise of a future built on more considered choices. And maybe, just maybe, a professional. The dust, a fine, insidious powder, settled over everything. It coated the pristine white sheets I had draped over the furniture, transforming them into ghostly, shapeless forms. It clung to my hair, tasted metallic on my tongue, and made the air thick and gritty. My lungs burned with every breath, a physical manifestation of the metaphorical weight that had just been lifted. The living room, once a canvas for my misplaced ambition, was now a war zone. Splintered wood, drywall shards, and a tangled mess of wires lay scattered across the floor, testament to the destructive power of a sledgehammer wielded with righteous indignation. I stood amidst the wreckage, a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration coursing through me. The silence, after the cacophony of demolition, was profound. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of a project stalled, but a light, airy quiet, almost expectant. The gaping maw in the wall, where the monstrous built-in had once loomed, was a testament to both my past folly and my newfound resolve. It was ugly, undeniably so, with exposed studs, ripped paper backing, and patches of rough plaster. But it was empty, and in that emptiness I saw not a void, but possibility. The first order of business, beyond a much-needed shower, was the cleanup. This wasn't a quick sweep and vacuum job. This was an archaeological excavation of my mistakes. Each piece of debris I picked up, each nail I extracted, each splinter I avoided, felt like a small act of penance. The sheer volume of material that had gone into that ill-fated structure was astounding, a monument to over-engineering and under-planning. As I bagged the refuse, I found myself chuckling at the sheer absurdity of it all. Who, in their right mind, designs a media console with the structural integrity of a small bunker? Only someone convinced of their own infallible DIY prowess, clearly. The following days were dedicated to the meticulous, tedious process of wall repair. This was where the real lesson began to sink in, not just intellectually, but physically. The previous built-in had masked a multitude of sins, uneven drywall cuts, hastily patched holes from earlier, forgotten projects, even a slightly off-kilter electrical outlet I had convinced myself was fine. Now, with the wall laid bare, there was no hiding. Every imperfection screamed for attention. I considered calling a professional for the drywall work. The thought was tempting, a siren song of effortless perfection. But something held me back. I had torn it down. I felt an obligation, a need, to rebuild it properly myself. Not with grand designs, but with humble, painstaking care. This wasn't about proving I could build something, but proving I could fix something, and fix it right. I spent hours watching YouTube tutorials, something I should have done before embarking on the original built-in. I learned about mesh tape, setting compound, topping compound, feathering edges, and the sheer, mind-numbing repetition of sanding. My arms ached, my shoulders burned, and my fingers developed a permanent layer of white dust. There were moments of frustration, certainly. A patch that wouldn't dry evenly, a sanding job that left an unsightly ridge, a joint compound application that looked more like abstract art than a smooth surface. But this time, the frustration was different. It wasn't the deep, soul-crushing despair of a project spiraling out of control. It was the manageable irritation of a learning curve, the kind that eventually yields to mastery, however small. Each layer of compound, each pass of the sander, was an act of reconciliation. I was literally smoothing over the rough edges of my past mistakes. The wall, slowly but surely, began to transform. The jagged edges softened, the holes disappeared, the unevenness receded. It was a slow, meditative process, a stark contrast to the rush and haphazardness of the demolition. It was about patience, precision, and understanding the materials, lessons that had been conspicuously absent in my previous DIY endeavors. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of dust and diligent effort, the wall was ready. It wasn't perfect, not factory smooth, but it was mine. It was a surface I had personally coaxed back from the brink of structural disrepair, a testament to a newfound respect for craftsmanship. The sense of accomplishment was quiet, internal, and deeply satisfying. It wasn't the ego-driven pride of having built something impressive, but the humble satisfaction of having done something well, for its own sake. Then came the paint. I chose a light, neutral shade, something that would enhance the sense of space and light, rather than dominate it. No bold feature walls, no trendy accent colors. Just a clean, calming backdrop. The application was a revelation. With a smooth, even surface beneath the roller, the paint went on like a dream. Each stroke was deliberate, each coat even. There were no drips, no uneven patches, no hurried attempts to cover up shoddy work. It was a simple act, but profoundly therapeutic. As the fresh paint dried, the room seemed to exhale. The lightness I had felt after the demolition intensified, spreading through the entire space. The wall, once a symbol of my DIY hubris, now stood as a quiet monument to humility and perseverance. It was utterly bare, a vast expanse of creamy white, and it was glorious. I spent days just looking at it, appreciating its emptiness. It felt like a deep breath after holding it for years. The absence of the bulky console created an illusion of greater space, a sense of airiness that had been suffocated by the previous structure. The entire room felt larger, brighter, more inviting. This blank canvas wasn't just physical, it was mental. With the wall cleared, my mind felt clearer too. The constant low hum of regret and the subtle irritation of living with a visible error had dissipated. I no longer walked into the living room and immediately scanned for the flaws, the crooked shelf, the peeling veneer. Instead, I saw an open invitation, a space waiting to be thoughtfully curated. The question of what to put there, if anything, lingered. The initial impulse, the old me, might have immediately started sketching new built-in designs, albeit simpler ones. But the new me resisted. The lesson wasn't just about building better. It was about building less, about appreciating simplicity, about not filling every available space just because it was empty. I started small. A simple, low-slung media cabinet, purchased from a reputable furniture store, not a flat-pack nightmare. It was elegant, functional, and perfectly sized. No assembly required, no hidden screws, no instructions written in hieroglyphics, just a smooth delivery and placement. It held the television and a few essential components, discreetly and efficiently. Above it, I decided on a single, large piece of abstract art, chosen for its calming colors and gentle forms. No shelves crammed with forgotten knickknacks, no elaborate displays. Just space, light, and a focal point that invited contemplation, not clutter. The true test of my transformation came when a friend, a fellow DIY enthusiast, visited. He walked in, looked at the wall, and his eyes widened. He knew the history of the built-in, had even offered a few unheeded suggestions during its construction. "Wow," he said, looking around. "It's different. So open. What happened to your masterpiece?" I recounted the story, the demolition, the painstaking repair, the deliberate choice for simplicity. He listened intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he finally said, "I always admired your ambition. But this is better. This shows real growth. And honestly, it looks fantastic, like a proper adult living room." His words, particularly the last part, resonated deeply. A proper adult living room. It wasn't about avoiding DIY forever, but about approaching it with maturity, with a clear understanding of my skills and limitations. It was about choosing quality over quantity, function over flashy pretense. The experience had a ripple effect. I found myself approaching other aspects of my home, and even my life, with a similar measured thoughtfulness. Before, I might have impulsively bought a new gadget or started a new hobby with boundless enthusiasm that quickly waned. Now I paused. I researched. I considered the long-term implications. I asked myself, is this truly necessary? Will it bring lasting value or just temporary gratification? The living room became a sanctuary, a place of calm and order. The new setup was so understated, so functional, that it almost disappeared into the background, allowing the room itself to breathe. The television was still there, of course, but it no longer dominated the space. It was a tool, not an altar. I even tackled a smaller project months later, a simple shelving unit for a spare bedroom. But this time, it was different. I meticulously measured, double-checked my cuts, pre-drilled every hole, and sanded every edge until it was smooth to the touch. I took my time, enjoying the texture of the wood under my fingers, the scent of sawdust, the quiet hum of the orbital sander as it patiently smoothed away imperfections. The process itself became the reward, a meditation in action. I was not just building a shelf. I was building a deeper connection to the materials, to the tools, and to the satisfaction of a task well executed. The finished unit, once assembled and secured, was not merely a functional item. It was a quiet testament, a physical manifestation of a lesson learned and repeatedly reinforced. It stood solid, unassuming, yet radiating a quiet pride, holding a small collection of books and a few carefully chosen objects. Its beauty lay not in ostentation, but in its integrity, its purposeful simplicity. This meticulousness, this unhurried dedication to process, began to seep into the wider currents of my existence. It was no longer confined to woodworking or home renovation. I found myself applying the same principles to my work, which had previously been a series of deadlines to meet, a cascade of tasks to check off. Now I sought to understand the deeper purpose of each assignment, to refine my contributions, to build something lasting, rather than just completing a transient requirement. My reports became clearer, my proposals more thoughtful, my collaborations more substantive. The urgency remained, but it was tempered by a newfound intentionality, a desire for quality over mere quantity. Even in my personal relationships, the impulse to react quickly, to fill silences with hurried words, began to recede. I listened more intently, truly hearing what was being said and what was left unsaid. I spoke with greater consideration, choosing my words not for their immediate impact or cleverness, but for their genuine meaning and potential for authentic connection. It was like sanding down the rough edges of communication, revealing the smoother, more resilient surface beneath. The superficial quickly gave way to the profound. The world had not slowed down, but my perception of it had. I was no longer rushing through moments, frantically collecting experiences as if they were scarce commodities. Instead, I was dwelling in them, extracting their essence, much like savoring a carefully prepared meal rather than wolfing down fast food. A simple walk became an exploration of light and shadow, the subtle shifts of the season. the quiet rhythm of my own breath. A cup of coffee was an opportunity to appreciate the warmth of the mug, the aroma, the gentle bitterness on my tongue, rather than just a caffeine delivery system. The boundless enthusiasm that once flared and faded, leaving behind a trail of half-finished projects and quickly discarded interests, was replaced by a deeper, more enduring satisfaction. It was less about the thrill of acquisition or the rush of novelty, and more about the quiet contentment of creation, of refinement, of intentional living. My home, once a collection of rooms filled with things, had become a curated space, each item holding purpose, each corner breathing peace. And I, in turn, had become a more curated self, shedding the superfluous, embracing the essential. This transformation was not a sudden revelation but a gradual unfolding, a continuous process of gentle excavation. Each measured cut, each carefully chosen piece of furniture, each deliberate pause before a decision, chipped away at the old habits, revealing the clearer, stronger structure beneath. It was a slow, beautiful construction, and I was both the architect and the evolving edifice. The journey was not towards a fixed destination of perfection, but rather an ongoing practice of mindful engagement, a quiet revolution in the way I inhabited my own life. There was a profound sense of liberation in this deliberate approach, a freedom found not in endless options, but in the clarity of conscious choice. This transformation was not a sudden revelation but a gradual unfolding, a continuous process of gentle excavation, each measured cut, each carefully chosen piece of furniture, each deliberate pause before a decision, chipped away at the old habits, revealing the clearer, stronger structure beneath. It was a slow, beautiful construction, and I was both the architect and the evolving edifice. The journey was not towards a fixed destination of perfection, but rather an ongoing practice of mindful engagement, a quiet revolution in the way I inhabited my own life. There was a profound sense of liberation in this deliberate approach, a freedom found not in endless options, but in the clarity of conscious choice. This clarity, born from the physical act of curating my environment, soon began to permeate the less tangible aspects of my existence. It was as if the meticulous sifting through possessions had sharpened a deeper internal faculty, allowing me to discern value and purpose not just in objects, but in moments, thoughts, and interactions. My home, stripped of its excess, became a living metaphor for my mind, a space I now sought to inhabit with the same intentionality. The principles of intentional living, once applied to shelves and closets, expanded their reach, touching the very architecture of my days, the rhythm of my thoughts, and the tenor of my relationships. It was a subtle, yet profound shift, moving from merely decluttering my surroundings to actively composing my life. One of the most significant areas to undergo this gentle renovation was my